So, welcome again to SwanseaCon. For those who don't know me, my name is James Harvey. I've been working with Agile delivery for around 10 years now. I started my career as a very bad web developer. It was all I ever wanted to be as a kid. Did a degree in computer science, got a job out of university as a junior web developer for a small startup company, 2 or 3 people, thinking this is going to be fantastic and I'll learn so much. And I just sucked at development. So being a small startup, though, every cloud and all, it's all hands on deck. So I was able to sort of get involved in everything, really. And again, being a small startup 10, 11 years ago, we adopted Agile because it was bleeding edge, just like everything else was. So I got involved in Agile very early on, and my career kind of went through a project management sort of arc. But Agile was always my go-to and was always the way that I thought about things first, which was really interesting as I joined new companies who wanted project managers to deal in waterfall, and I was kind of joining and saying, well, okay, but can we also look at this thing called Agile and see how it works for you? Anyway, so the last couple of years, I became a certified Agile trainer. I formed Agile Snap, who are a training partner and an education partner with the BCS and the DevOps Institute. And I'm also one of the co-organizers of the Southwest Agile group. So if we have any technical people in here who don't often get involved in Agile groups, or if we have any Agilists who like to get involved in Agile groups, then come and see us. We meet in Cardiff at the moment on the 4th Thursday of every month. I like to start off all my talks with some sort of tenuous quote that links back somehow to what we're going to be talking about. In this case, Terry Pratchett said, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you are. And if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you're going. And this is really true with a lot of Agile transitions that I come across, where they'll read a book on Scrum specifically normally, decide that they want to go and take Scrum and implement it in their workplace before they've even looked at where they are, what they need to do, what they should be able to change, and more often than not, it leads to a failed transition. And a lot of companies that work with Agile transitions these days versus companies that worked in Agile transitions 8, 10 years ago, nowadays we're just dealing with the mess that people have tried to sort of implement and failed with their implementation, which we'll come on to in a bit. So another quote which I always have to put up, because similar to what Simon said this morning, Scrum does kind of get a bit of a bad rep these days. It's easy to pick on Scrum. And I got quoted in saying I don't hate Scrum. In fact, I love Scrum because I do come across like I do give it a bit of a kick in. But I do really like Scrum. And for the right, like anything, with the right project, it can work really well. But it's, as we'll find out today, hopefully, it's often used in the wrong circumstances. And it's generally speaking people's first sort of thought when they think about Agile projects. So this from the State of Agile survey this year, and it's a recurring theme from all the years that have gone by as well. For those at the back that can't see it, so why do people choose Agile? Generally speaking, to accelerate project delivery, enhance the ability to manage changing priorities, to increase productivity, enhance software quality, delivery predictability, improve business IT alignment, etc., etc. They're all really, really good reasons to look at an Agile approach to delivering software. A few years ago, this really started to bother me. I don't know why. It was just one of the things. I said, why is Scrum so kind of so commonly used? Why is it the go-to methodology for people looking to implement Scrum? Because for everything Scrum does well, there's a lot of times where Scrum just doesn't fit. And I was often talked to a lot of people who maybe are recently trained in Scrum, and they come across very, the textbook said this, again, similar to what Simon said this morning, the textbook says this, therefore we have to do it this way. And a lot of the time that kind of grated a bit with me in that this isn't what Agile delivery is supposed to be. It's not about following a set process and saying we have to do it this way. Continuous improvement is huge in Agile, and we really should be embracing that. So either way, 70% of Agile implementations today are in Scrum. But why? Why are so many organizations using Scrum or project teams using Scrum? And there's a whole separate talk on whether or not they're actually using Scrum, whether they think they're using Scrum, but we'll assume they're all actually using Scrum for now. And I thought about it, and this basically was the best answer I could come up with from experience, and certainly from the way I started my career. My first introduction to Agile was with Scrum. We brought a Scrum expert in, and we all blindly followed. And it was only many years later, after I was sort of doing the same thing, going to organizations and saying Scrum is brilliant, we should be using Scrum, it's the best way to deliver software. It was only then that I started thinking, well, actually, is this the best way of doing things? And I didn't know that there were other types of Agile frameworks at the time. And even less did I actually think of going out and researching them or going training them or what have you. So this Pied Piper effect, I think personally this accounts for a large portion of why people adopt Scrum. It's not malicious, but you bring an expert in. They're obviously trained to teach you Scrum, so therefore they don't have that ability, that broad approach to be able to say, well, Scrum says you do it like this, but actually Agile is a much wider thing, and you could do it like this or like that. You could be pragmatic about it. And a big part of that is because of the Scrum Alliance. And take nothing away from them. From a business model, they've done a fantastic they've done a fantastic job of turning people's perception of of Agile into, well, let's look for Agile training, and what's the first thing that comes up? Certified Scrum Master, Certified Product Owner. And I think, generally speaking, if you're outside of the Agile community, if you're looking at Scrum, in the same way that if you look at Prince 2, if you're looking for Waterfall, you think Prince 2. And it's the same way with Agile. If you think of Agile, you think of the Scrum Alliance. And we're trying to get out of that way of thinking now. So, coupled with that, my big issue was that, going back to early on in my career, if I wanted to get a job as a project manager anywhere, I had to have a certificate in Prince 2. There was no ifs or buts about it. If you wanted a job, they wouldn't even look at your CV until you had Prince 2, even though you were never going to use it. You'd never deliver a project that way. And my big fear was that, it's CSM, Certified Scrum Master, is very much becoming the Prince 2 of this day and age now. I see so many job adverts that are, you have to be a certified Scrum Master. And again, I think to myself, well, why? You've already made that, therefore you've already decided that you want to run Scrum before you even figured out what's the best approach for you. Why else would you need a Scrum Master otherwise? So Scrum Master, again, it's a fantastic training course. We teach it, but it's not the approach for default, I want to be trained in Scrum, let's go and do a certified Scrum Master course. So, a lot of the companies we work with, we go in and we say, okay, so why have you adopted Scrum at the moment? And they'll turn around and say, well, why do we think they've adopted Scrum? As we said, they blindly followed a Scrum coach, a misunderstanding that Scrum is equal to Agile. Again, that was me for many years. Certified Scrum Master, compulsory on CVs, and again, it's so common, it's thought of as the natural Scrum Agile framework now. So we go in and we say, okay, so why did you pick Scrum as a delivery method rather than sticking with something waterfall, sticking with something like Prince 2, or just a big design up front way of doing things? Why did you specifically pick Scrum? And generally speaking, the answers we get back are things like, oh, well, it's incredibly flexible, we get frequent feedback loops, we can deliver working software really early, change in our industry is inevitable, so we need to have a framework that can adapt to that, efficient communication, and so on and so on. And they can often reel out a huge long list of reasons why they've chosen Scrum over a typical waterfall methodology. But then I turn around and say, okay, so now tell me why you've chosen Scrum over another Agile methodology. And generally speaking, what tends to happen is people will just look around the table waiting for somebody to say, oh, we picked Scrum because it fits our way of working because X, Y, Z, and Lean or DSDM or SAFe or whatever doesn't actually work for us. I normally play a game where you have to name all the films in here, but we'll be here forever if we try and do that, so we won't do that today. So it became a big problem for me because, again, people assumed they wanted Scrum, and therefore if you're assuming if you're assuming you want to work in that way, then have you actually talked to your business, talk to your developers, talk to your project teams, and found out why they need to work in a certain way. Because if you're not doing that, if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you need to be. So yeah, if we find it hard to compare Scrum to any other Agile methodology, then how do we know Scrum is the best approach for us? And again, I'm not suggesting here that we say, right, today we're going to do Scrum this sprint, and then the next 2 weeks we're going to try a different approach. But I think we need to be much more open-minded about how we actually deliver software, and not just treat Scrum as this, this holy Bible that saves us from the tyranny of waterfall and so forth. So we're going to play a little game now to see how much you guys know. So first of all, show of hands, who has considered themselves part of a delivery team in here versus a technical team? So delivery team first of all, project managers, scrum masters, that sort of person, Shelby, on your own. So are the people technical side of the organisation in here? So developers, etc. Okay, very interesting. So we're going to do it by table. Have a quick conversation amongst your teams. We want to see how many of these different Agile methodologies you can guess. Only 5 minutes doing this. So again, for those that can't read, these are the back. The first one, scalable Agile project delivery with the right amount of governance needed. Teams communicate through practices such as co-location and pair programming. And these are all different methodologies. Frameworks, processes, call them up what you want. I'm not precious about it at all. A team has 3 roles with specific properties and responsibilities. No prescriptive roles or process. Focus on organizational agility improvements. Originally a manufacturing approach, eliminating waste is key. A mixture of original ideas and a container for several existing Agile approaches. So let's see how much we know about Agile before we carry on today's session. So like 3 or 4 minutes amongst your teams, have a conversation. If you can't see them, come a bit closer. And then we're going to try and figure out which one is which. Okay, 2, 3, 4 minutes. That'll take us to 20 past. Okay. So, before we do this, everyone put your hands up a second. Everyone. Put your hands down if you could have named 6 Agile methodologies, frameworks, processes, whatever you want to call them, before this session, before we started talking about this. So I'm expecting good things then from this group. Okay, so now you have to nominate one person on your team to stand on a chair to read the answers out. Okay, so scalable Agile project delivery with the right amount of governance needed, not my words. What do we think? Anyone shout out some answers? Safe? Any others?
DSCM-A2.
What are you going for?
DSCM-A2. Agile project management.
It is DSDM. Well done. Teams communicate through practices such as co-location and pair programming. Expected that one with the amount of devs we've got. Team has 3 roles with specific properties and responsibilities. Scrum. No prescriptive roles or process. Focus on organizational agility improvements. Kanban. What was that one?
Developer anarchy.
Developer anarchy, no. It was Kanban. Originally a manufacturing approach, eliminating waste is key. Lean. A mixture of original ideas and a container for several existing Agile approaches. Scrumban. Cool. So, hopefully already we've started to learn that there is more to Agile than just Scrum, which is ultimately the whole point of this talk. And again, there are a lot of similarities between a lot of these processes. I always use the word process. I know a lot of purists will shoot me down for it, but to me it's a process. I know there are a lot of similarities between these, but similarly they all do something a little bit differently that might make it more appropriate for the sort of projects that you're running. And a bit later on, we'll look at them at a very broad level, just for those of you who might not know about SAFe or DSDM. Obviously, we'll take a very, very high-level approach to them. But if you take away one thing from today, and hopefully you already have by the title of the talk, but if you take away one thing from today, it's just to learn, just to be wary of the fact that Agile is just an umbrella. Agile has a set of common guidelines, common recommendations, but the processes that sit underneath can be very specific. And hopefully you can now start to see the dangers of saying, right, okay, well, if we want to look to become more agile, we might not want to just say, let's bring a Scrum expert or a Scrum trainer in to train our guys in being certified Scrum Masters or whatever. Because the danger of doing that is that you've already picked your tunnel that you're going to start going down. It's going to be very, very one-dimensional, because that trainer is obviously going to teach you about Scrum. He or she is not going to teach you about what else is out there, what else might work better for you. It's not a very pragmatic approach. So be aware that Agile is the umbrella. There are many, many more hybrids and specific methodologies that sit underneath here. And obviously things like XP, came before Agile, even was a thought in anyone's in anyone's eyes. A thought in anyone's eyes? Thought in anyone's minds. So there are a lot of different approaches. Some of them are much more verbose than others, for good reason. So when an organisation approaches us with regards to a transition, or when an organisation looks to undertake an Agile transition, this generally is what happens. They will decide they want to become Agile, and there are good reasons and bad reasons for wanting to become Agile, although I always argue that the bad reasons are still good reasons, because we should still be looking to work this way, because we know best, right? But again, that's a whole other talk as to why you become Agile. They generally then go and send someone on a Scrum Master course, and again, this has changed slightly now in the last couple of years, because there's a lot more awareness of Agile. But certainly in the past, they would just send a couple of people on Scrum Master courses, they would come back, and then they would basically help roll that out within the entire organisation. And I've been that person. I've been the person joining a company with the Agile experience because I'm a certified Scrum Master. So hey, let's just lean on this person and roll things out according to what Scrum says, basically. But if we do that, we're basically alienating a huge chunk of our organisation, which are actually the people who have to work this way. And for the first time ever in my career, about 4 years ago now, I was working with a fairly large organisation in London, and I was brought in. We were going to do some training with them, some coaching with the individual development teams. And for the first time ever, I had developers come to me and say, we don't want to work this way. And I said, I don't understand why this sort of way of working should be 100% how the devs want to work. And they were saying, well, no, because we've done Scrum in the past. We've been told we're going to work a certain way in the past, which isn't Scrum, but they're told it's Scrum. So basically their feelings on Agile was that it doesn't work. It just stings us in the long run, because they allow us to maybe work on continuous delivery and deliver things as we go, but they've still got a hard deadline with fully functional requirements that have to be made by that date. And a big part of that is because they decided on a transition before actually involving the organisation. And again, how do you know that you've chosen the right way of Agile working if you haven't involved the people who, on a day-to-day basis, actually have to make the cogs churn? So yeah, organisations are really, really good at this bit. CEO level, management level, they're fantastic at coming up with an idea that feels like they've come up with it. Or we'll do this Agile thing, we'll do Scrum because the guys will love it because it's we're in tune with our development teams. But in reality, your organisation, your devs might say, well, Scrum will never work for us because we're a government organisation, so we can't work this way. It's pointless trying to implement Scrum and just put a blindfold on the fact that you've got these decades worth of legacy process or legacy governance that there is literally no way of changing overnight. If you throw Scrum at something like that, it's just going to fail instantly, and then everyone gets this negative impression of Scrum and Agile. So just talking about culture briefly, the way I always like to look at culture is don't just sell people an Agile framework, because generally speaking, a person on a development team couldn't care less about what the framework is. All they care about is, well, how does it help me? How does it mean that I'm a better developer? I can deliver my things more efficiently. How can I work in a way that suits me? It's not because of the framework. The framework is there to help them achieve that. So don't dress Scrum up as a saviour that, hey, we're going to be doing Scrum, it's going to be great for you guys, this is all for you, because that might not work. But always try and sell the benefits of something rather than selling the actual framework itself. So a bit wordy, but what should happen, in my opinion, is you have your reasons for wanting to be agile. You have to consider barriers or existing processes. And for me, this is the one area where Scrum really, really does fall flat on its face. Not because of Scrum, but because people want to try and force Scrum into everything. And again, if you look at, government is a really good example of this. If you look at government examples where they want to be, they consider themselves Scrum, what they generally are saying is that our development teams work in 2-week sprints. That's kind of it, because they still have to get all their budget signed off up front and all the requirements that they're going to be delivering signed off up front. They still do big design up front, but they like to call themselves Scrum. And this is a perfect example of why Scrum is just not the right approach. You might want to get to Scrum somewhere down the line, but if you just go in and ignore barriers and processes that have been there for decades, I'm not saying they're right or they're the right way to do things, but Scrum just will not work in that environment. It's physically impossible for Scrum to work that way. You need to establish the sort of success criteria you want, because again, we can't say that Scrum failed or didn't or worked if we don't know what we're going to measure it on. And again, if you're trying to implement Agile, be it Scrum or anything else, into an organization, nobody expects that period of productivity drop for X amount of time. Everyone expects you to get instant results because it's that silver bullet that everyone's been wanting for so long. So, of course, if you start doing something and then your productivity drops off, people will just blame Agile straight away because it's the new thing, and then you'll never get past that stage. Educate the right people, and by the right people I mean everybody in the team. We don't just send a Scrum Master on a course and hope they can absorb enough information for the entire team. You nurture that culture, help build that culture up, help people feel like they're the ones making the decision that Scrum is the right approach, or DSDM is the right approach, or let's just start with Kanban and what we've got now and figure out where our bottlenecks are, rather than just you figuring all this stuff out for me. Evaluate different options. Then we choose the framework that best suits us today. Agile's really good at allowing us to make decisions frequently, because we reduce the risk of any decision we make, because we make them throughout the entire project rather than front load them all at the very beginning. So we can only make decisions based on what we know right now. If we want to be Scrum at some point in the future, that's great. But if that doesn't work right now, then we should be making a decision that will work. So if DSDM fits more appropriately over the existing organization that we've got, then make that decision right now. Don't be afraid to go in a different direction if it will hopefully get you to the place you want to be further down the line. Select appropriate coaching and training. Whilst training can be seen as a negative, it's always a good thing to keep people up to date. And finally, implement, inspect, and adapt. Like any type of Agile framework or product or development team, you should always be looking at how you can improve that process moving forward. And again, if you're so in bed with Scrum, it's very difficult to look beyond actually what else can offer you outside of those Scrum boundaries. Continuous improvement is obviously key here. Two takeaways there from the Agile Manifesto. And again, just to reiterate, if we can't look outside the box, then how can we always say that we're continuously improving? Scrum teams are excellent at sitting down at the end of every sprint and saying, right, what do we do well? What didn't we do so well? What can we do differently? But that's still within the realms of Scrum. So is Scrum still the right approach for us? Do we ever ask that question? Probably not. And I think the reason Scrum gets picked on an awful lot, I mean, obviously because it gets used an awful lot, but I do feel that there's no worse, I've got to be very careful with my words now, there's no worse kind of feeling than when you've got someone who's just fresh back from a Scrum Master course or fresh back for some sort of Scrum course on the team, and they are the most entitled people I've ever met in my entire career. But they'll sit down at a table and they will point blank refuse to do something because that's not the way they learned to do it in their most recent Scrum course. And again, I'm not doubting that Scrum doesn't tell us to do things the best and most efficient way. And again, if we had a blank canvas and we were able to just completely work in a Scrum way with no external influences and things like that, then yes, Scrum would be fantastic. But sometimes we have to be pragmatic. And I feel like people who've been on Scrum training courses specifically, because you're so narrow-minded with regards to one process, you lose all sense of pragmatism when you come back to your project. And like I said, I've seen people refuse to do things because, we can't do this design now because Scrum doesn't work that way. And like anything, it's not, we're trying to avoid big bang deliveries, big bang approaches, and surely that applies to how we work as well. So yeah, be pragmatic and not precious, because people get so precious over Scrum, and it's the kind of, they would bleed for Scrum because it's so good, and the only reason it's not working is because we're not allowing them to take Scrum and do it properly. And again, whilst that might be true, it's very rare that you get the opportunity in real life to actually work that way. So yeah, outside the box, continuous improvement. We're really good at saying, can we be any better? Can we do anything differently? But, back yourself and ask the hard questions. Are we using the right framework? Is Scrum still the best approach for us, or can we do something different? Do we even know what the alternatives are? Do we know that DSDM exists? Do we know that SAFe exists? Do we know that there's a Prince 2 Agile module nowadays? Do we know that these things are out there? So we'll just go through a few of the different approaches, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end if needs be, but I don't want to keep you guys from lunch, so I've whizzed through it a bit up until now. So, Scrum. As I said, I don't hate Scrum. Scrum is actually a very, very good approach. And if you are fortunate enough to be able to implement Scrum in an environment that actually allows it to thrive, then I can guarantee you will get good results from it. Created by developers for development. It's an iterative process around the empirical pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Recognises just 3 roles: Scrum Master, Product Owner, and the team. And this can often be the hardest pill to swallow when you're talking about large organisations and why Scrum fails within those organisations. Because especially, again, talking of government, you might have processes and roles that have been in place for years, and what you're basically doing is saying, well, we don't care about you anymore because we only care about the team and Product Owner and the Scrum Master. So we don't need a program manager anymore. We don't need a project manager per se anymore. So that could be a real sticking point. Works very well with client collaboration. In fact, it only works with client collaboration. Again, I've been involved with teams that say we really want to be Scrum, but our client doesn't want to work this way. So what we'll do is we'll take all their requirements up front like they want to, we'll sign a contract with them up front like they want to, and then we'll basically just turn those requirements into user stories and deliver them on a bi-weekly basis. It's pointless. You're literally wasting your time doing that. You're better off taking an approach, looking at what your existing process allows, trying to get your client to work in a different way. I'm not suggesting you don't do that, but it's pointless trying to operate Scrum in an environment that doesn't allow it. And yeah, focus on continuous delivery improvement. Every Agile methodology should be having that as a punchline. I'm sure you've all seen this diagram for now, so we're not going to go into this in any detail today. But essentially, I always add the product vision at the beginning because it never seems to start with that. But it looks too simple to be true. And as I said, in many, many cases, it is too simple to be true. But if you're in a trusted environment where your product owners and your project teams are very much in sync, this works really, really well. But it takes time to get there. It's not just to throw it at the wall and hope it sticks kind of deal. Kanban. How many people thought Kanban was just about having 3 swim lanes: to do, doing, and done? That was my understanding of Kanban when I first heard the word way back when. Kanban should be every single organization's starting point when you are looking to transition from any way of working to any other way of working. Because nothing will highlight your flaws, your good things, your bad things, where your bottlenecks are better than Kanban. Kanban always starts with your existing process. So you're basically just mapping out your process to sort of say that it goes from here to here to here to here to here to here, and then we're done. And what this does, it allows us to sort of, we can focus on quick wins, so we can get the most efficient things done first of all. Importantly, it adds a measure to what we're doing, so we can see that it takes X amount of time to go from A to B, from B to C to D, etc. And that allows us to add success metrics in there, which gives us the opportunity then to obviously report that we've actually succeeded in a transition. It's very incremental as well. You know, you could spend 6 months just focusing on one discrete little area, and that one small area could save you, X amount of % in efficiency moving forward. But if you're not starting with Kanban, then you're doing something really wrong, because you're basically saying, I don't have a clue, we're just going to throw this new process in because someone else says it works. Sounds stupid, but again, how many of those 70% of people using Scrum are at Scrum because they started with Kanban? I'd probably say something around 0.0%. Based on just-in-time delivery, prioritize backlog, very useful for work that's difficult to estimate. So Kanban in its purest form is in fact 3 different swim lanes. And if you've got work that you literally cannot estimate, again, I've had Scrum teams try and do this, where they're dealing with such complex work, and they're desperately trying to estimate them to a point where they can fit them into a 2-week sprint, and it's just not, they just physically can't do it because of the amount of unknowns and so forth. So just use Kanban, just work on it until you've finished it, and then work on the next thing. If you don't know how to estimate it, or if you can't estimate, I should say, then use Kanban. Very reactive and accommodating to change. Obviously, even Scrum, as much as we like to say Scrum is very, very responsive to change, it's not if you're dealing with things that can change on a daily basis, because Scrum, obviously, you're locking yourself into a 2-week or more period. So yeah, that's what Kanban looks like at a very, very high level. Lean. Anyone use Lean out of interest in their organisation at the moment? So Lean comes from obviously manufacturing origins. A lot of focus around reducing waste here. So generally speaking, you tend to see Lean these days in software with sort of a Lean startup in mind. So people might be using the Lean startup model to produce prototypes, for example. So what we're trying to do here is say, we could potentially produce a prototype in the time it takes us to come up with some sort of a spec initially, which we'll have a look at in a second. And last responsible moment delivery, we saw that this morning. Fundamental to Lean. Building quality, mistake-proofing code with test-driven development, don't build legacy code. That's what Lean's all about. And this is kind of what Lean Startup looks like. If you do look at all the different Agile methodologies, feedback loops are obviously very, very common amongst them all. They're all pretty much the same with different terminology. But again, the idea here is that you can get something physically built rather in the time it might take you to actually sit down and figure out whether or not you can build it. So really, really useful if you're just trying something new for the first time. You might not be able to estimate it until you've done something like this. XP, again, this was something we said earlier, this came about before Agile was even a thing, and XP was introduced to kind of compensate for the fact that Agile didn't exist at the time. Introduced to help dealing with change in development requirements. Obviously back in 80s, 90s, where we were very much trying to deliver software using waterfall methodologies, this was kind of the first moment where people sort of took a stand and said, look, this way of working doesn't really wash very well with us. Pair programming, this sort of stuff, it's all stuff that you can use within any other Agile methodology. There is an overarching framework with XP these days for organizations that don't have any sort of delivery methodology. But in general, this stuff is very, very technical, very much at the technical level. And it's good practice that happens in all different methodologies. DSDM, we're running low on time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But again, DSDM can be very complicated, but again, there's some good stuff here. There are some good things in DSDM that you can take away. The things I wanted to highlight really with DSDM is just the sort of the snowman, as I call it, which highlights the different roles that DSDM recognizes. Particularly useful, again, if you're looking to implement Agile in an organization with a huge hierarchy of different roles and so forth. Something like this might be much more appropriate, might be an easier sell for the business to adopt. And safe, which is my favourite one. Scaled Agile framework. Again, you think to yourself, well, if you want to scale Agile, do it small first and then scale it up incrementally. Again, I was kind of on the fence with safe at first. I thought, well, safe looks horrendous, because I look at that and I think I would never want to go into an organisation and sort of say, right, let's do this. But actually, if you break a lot of this stuff down, there's again a lot of common sense in here. And if safe is your best way of implementing Agile to start with, then use safe. You know, safe was built for organisations that require that governance. So, you know, use it to your advantage if you're in that scenario. I'm rushing through now because we're almost out of time. Prince 2 Agile is the newest one here, and again, a lot of Agilists scoff at the fact that Agile is now within Prince 2, and it's often seen as, oh, how pathetic, you know, Prince 2's waterfall, Prince 2 can't work. But again, to follow up on something Simon said this morning, it builds on foundations, and that's all they're trying to do here with Prince 2 Agile. They understand that, you know, we have to have some sort of agility in software delivery, and what they're trying to do now within Prince 2, and I'll gladly talk you through some of this after if you are interested. But after I started looking at it, I thought, well, actually, it does make a lot of sense. And ultimately, if we are trying to get some Agile ways of working into typically waterfall projects, then that can't be a bad thing, right? Because that's the first way, that's the first step in the direction of an Agile transition. So like any decision, don't force something that doesn't feel right. Don't try and implement Scrum into an environment where it just simply won't work. You know, if you need to take a step back, take a Kanban approach and figure out the best way, then do that. But don't just try and, like I said, shoehorn something in if you know it's not going to work, because it's just going to cause distress for everybody and people are never going to trust Agile again in the future. I'm not going to do the case study because you haven't got time, but a few things to remember to take away. Focus on Agile fundamentals first. You know, look up the Agile Manifesto, look up the principles of Agile. Those are the things you should be focusing on when you look at a transition. You shouldn't be focusing on how long your stand-up is or, you know, where your retrospective should be held. Think about what actually makes us Agile versus what Agile is. The best Agilists, like any role within this industry really, are platform agnostic. You know, if you are a good Agilist, you're aware of all the different approaches out there and you're able to draw on that experience and bring in what you want to use from all the different types of Agile that are out there. You'll find that most complement each other very well. As we said, XP fits really nicely with any of them. And some of them, someone mentioned Scrumban earlier on, you know, mixing these methodologies together. Again, if you're just focusing so much on Scrum, you don't have the luxury of being able to mix these things together. Don't blindly follow anyone. It's the mistake I made. And finally, Scrum Master and Product Owner are not the only team members who deserve training. There are so many different roles which all need to be part of that transition, part of your Agile team, that need to be, you know, aware of the way that you work so you can continuously improve it. Mix it up, try new things. You know, Agile is all about continuous improvement, like we've said many times today already. It's all about trying something out, measuring it, seeing if it works. If it does, great, keep doing it. If it doesn't, fine, you can try something else instead. You know, we are de-risking a lot of these decisions. And finally, just wanted to talk about on the notion of platform agnostic. The BCS Agile Foundation course is the one that we specialise in because it is platform agnostic. You know, we don't just train people on Scrum, Kanban, Lean, we train people on everything. We'll give you a broad understanding of all these different methodologies. And if you want to go down one particular avenue afterwards, then that's absolutely fine and acceptable. But we like to give people a wider overview in general to start with. So if you are interested in the BCS course, just come and see me at any time over the next couple of days. If you want to know more, there's a book that goes along with what I've said today by the BCS. BCS Foundation Certificate in Agile, like we said. And finally, I'd encourage you to seek out local Agile groups. The South Wales Agile group, we have about 400 members at the moment in Cardiff. We have a really good mix of people that come to those, so would welcome anyone who wants to come along, maybe do a talk or so forth. And that's it for me. Like I said, sorry I rushed through the last few bits, but I don't want to hold you guys up from your lunch. I'll take any questions now, or I'll be around, as I said, in the foyer if you have any questions. But thank you very much for being attentive.